People like you should know better than to sit here, Daniel Brooks said, his voice cutting through the low hum of country music and clinking glasses, and before anyone could react, the red cocktail in his hand tipped forward, spilling across the woman's shoulder in a slow, deliberate arc that caught the amber bar lights and scattered them like shattered glass across her skin, and then everything stopped, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet collapse of motion as conversations died mid-sentence, and a pool cue hovered in midair, and the bartender's rag froze halfway across a glass, because everyone had seen it, everyone understood what it meant, and no one wanted to be the first to acknowledge it, least of all the woman at the center of it, Ava Carter, who didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't even reach for a napkin as the liquid traced a line down her sleeve and dripped from her fingertips onto the polished wood, each drop echoing louder than it should in the sudden stillness, her reflection staring back at her from the mirror behind the bar, steady, unreadable, like she was watching someone else wear her face, while Daniel leaned back on his stool with the loose confidence of a man who had never been questioned, his badge catching the light at his hip, a quiet signal to everyone in the room that this moment belonged to him, that whatever line had just been crossed would remain invisible as long as he said it was. A few of his fellow officers chuckling under their breath, not because it was funny, but because laughter was easier than discomfort, easier than choosing a side. And somewhere near the end of the counter, a waitress hesitated with a tray of drinks, eyes flicking between Ava and the exit like she was calculating the safest place to stand, the air thick with the smell of citrus and alcohol, and something heavier underneath it, something unspoken, something that had lived in places like this long before tonight. Ava finally moved, not away, not toward him, just enough to place her glass down with careful precision, the soft click of it against the wood sounding deliberate, controlled, her fingers resting there a second longer than necessary, as if grounding herself in something real, something steady, her breathing slow, measured, invisible unless you were looking for it, and Daniel noticed the absence of reaction, the lack of anger, the refusal to play the role he had already written for her, and it irritated him in a way he couldn't quite name, his smile tightening at the edges as he leaned forward again, elbows on the bar, voice dropping just enough to make it feel personal, like a warning disguised as a joke, like a line drawn without ever being spoken. But Ava didn't meet it with fear or defiance. She met it with silence, the kind that wasn't empty but full, heavy, deliberate, the kind that made people shift in their seats and glance at each other and suddenly become aware of their own breathing, their own stillness, because something about her presence didn't fit the script, didn't bend to the pressure of the room, and for a brief, flickering second, the balance of power felt less certain than it had a moment ago, like a floorboard loosening under weight, like a crack forming where no one expected it. And though no one said it out loud, though no one moved to interrupt, there was a shared, quiet realization hanging in the air that whatever had just started in that bar wasn't going to end the way Daniel Brooks thought it would. Bar slowly returning, but softer now, cautious, like the room itself was waiting for permission to breathe again. Glasses clinking with less confidence, voices kept just under a murmur, and near the far end of the counter the waitress finally set her tray down, her hands still trembling slightly as she adjusted the napkins, stealing a glance toward Ava with something like concern mixed with admiration. Because it was not just what had happened, it was how Ava carried it, how she held herself. Upright without stiffness, calm without submission, present without asking for space. And that quiet presence began to shift something invisible in the room, a subtle change in weight, in attention, as if people were beginning to notice details they had ignored before. The straight line of her posture, the steadiness of her breathing, the way her eyes moved not with fear but with awareness, taking in everything without rushing, without needing to prove anything. And Daniel felt that shift too, though he could not name it. Only that the room no longer leaned entirely in his direction, that the easy control he carried like a second skin had loosened just enough to be felt, his fingers tapping once against the bar, a habit he did not realize he had when something did not go his way, and he leaned in again, closer this time, his voice quieter but edged with impatience, as if trying to reclaim the moment before it slipped further out of reach. But Ava did not give him that moment, did not meet his eyes right away. Instead, she turned slightly toward the mirror behind the bar, catching her reflection again. The red stain faint now against the dark fabric, the bar lights casting a warm glow across her face, highlighting not anger, not fear, but something steadier, something grounded. And for a brief second she closed her eyes, not in defeat, but in control, a measured pause that seemed to gather the room into stillness once more. And when she opened them again, there was clarity. There, quiet and unwavering, the kind that did not need to announce itself to be felt. And she reached for her glass again, sliding it an inch forward with the softest sound, a small movement that somehow drew more attention than anything louder could have. And in that moment the balance shifted just a little more, not enough for anyone to speak, not enough for anyone to act, but enough that the next move would matter, enough that whatever came next would not be ignored the way moments like this usually were. And though Daniel still stood there with his badge catching the light, still surrounded by the comfort of familiarity and unspoken loyalty, there was now a quiet question in the air, unformed, but present, about who exactly held the power in this room, and whether it was as fixed as it had seemed just minutes before. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose, the kind of controlled breath that usually came before a joke or a warning. But this time it lingered, unfinished, as if even he was not sure which direction to take, his fingers brushing lightly against the edge of his badge, as though it might remind him who he was in this room, who he had always been. And yet something about the woman in front of him made that certainty feel thinner than usual, like a uniform worn a size too large, still recognizable, but not quite fitting the moment. And he straightened just slightly, reclaiming space with posture alone, his voice returning, quieter now, but more deliberate. "You are real calm for someone who just made a mess of herself," he said, the words landing softer than before, but carrying a weight that invited agreement from the room, invited laughter, invited the familiar rhythm of dismissal. But the response did not come, not the way he expected, not immediately, because people were watching her. Now, not him, watching how she stood, how she breathed, how she chose each movement like it mattered. And Ava finally turned her head toward him, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to meet his gaze with a steadiness that did not rise to challenge, but did not lower itself either, her eyes clear, focused, present in a way that made the distance between them feel smaller than it was. And for a moment the noise of the bar faded again, not completely, but enough that the sound of ice shifting in a glass somewhere down the counter felt amplified, like a reminder that time had not stopped, only slowed. And Ava's voice came then, calm and even, measured without hesitation. "Officer," she said, not loud, not soft, just exact, the word landing with a precision that carried more weight than its volume suggested. And Daniel blinked once, just once, because something about the way she said it felt different, not respectful, not mocking, but accurate, as if she had placed him exactly where he stood without needing to raise her voice to do it. And a few of the men behind him shifted, subtle movements, shoulders adjusting, eyes flicking between them, sensing that the conversation had changed shape even if they could not yet define how. And Ava did not rush to fill the silence that followed. She let it sit, let it expand just enough to be noticed, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the bar, fingers relaxed, posture steady, as if she had nowhere else to be and nothing to prove. And Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, not enough for most to notice, but enough to signal that the ease he carried earlier was no longer intact, his confidence still there, but now layered with something else, something closer to irritation, to curiosity, to the need to reassert control before it slipped further away. And he leaned forward again, closing the distance by a few inches, his voice dropping lower, intended for her, but heard by everyone. "You think you are above this place or something," he said. The question shaped like a statement, shaped like a boundary he expected her to accept, but Ava did not answer right away. She looked at him for a moment longer, then past him, her gaze briefly touching the others in the room, the bartender, the waitress, the men who had laughed earlier and now stood quieter, more aware, as if she was taking in not just him but the entire space, the entire system that allowed moments like this to happen without consequence. And when she spoke again her voice remained steady, unchanged. "I think," she said, pausing just enough to let the words settle before they fully formed. "Everyone in this room deserves to be treated with respect." And the sentence did not rise, did not fall. It simply existed, plain and direct, without accusation, without emotion layered on top. And that simplicity made it heavier, made it harder to dismiss, because it did not attack, it defined. And for a brief second no one moved, no one laughed, no one interrupted. The idea hanging there like something unfamiliar in a place that had grown used to looking past it. And Daniel held her gaze, searching for something to push against, something to reduce, but found only that same calm reflection looking back at him, steady as the light above them, unmoved by the weight he was used to carrying into every room. The words settled into the space between them, not loud enough to demand attention, yet too clear to ignore. And for a moment Daniel did not respond, his expression holding as if he was deciding whether to laugh it off or press further, his eyes narrowing slightly as he searched her face for something he could use, some sign of hesitation, some crack in that calm. But there was none, only that same steady presence that refused to rise or fall with his tone, and behind him one of the other. Officers shifted his weight, the faint creak of a barstool cutting through the quiet like a misplaced sound, the kind that made people suddenly aware of how still they had become, and the bartender, who had spent years learning when to stay out of things, now found himself watching more closely than he intended, his hands resting on the counter without moving, as if even routine had paused to see how this would unfold. And Daniel finally let out a short breath, something between a scoff and a chuckle, though it did not carry the same confidence as before. Respect, he repeated, the word rolling off his tongue like it was unfamiliar, like it did not belong in this room unless he decided it did, and he leaned back again, attempting to reclaim distance, to reset the dynamic to something more comfortable, something predictable. But the room did not fully follow him this time, the attention lingering where Ava stood instead of returning to him as it usually would, and that subtle shift pressed against him in a way he could not ignore, his jaw tightening for a brief second before he forced his shoulders to relax, his voice coming again, a little louder now, meant for the room as much as for her. You walk into a place like this and start telling people how they should act, he said, gesturing loosely with one hand, as if indicating the entire bar, the city, the unspoken rules that had always existed. You better be ready to back that up. And a few quiet murmurs followed, not agreement exactly, but the reflex of people used to echoing authority when it spoke. Yet even those sounds felt thinner than they should have, like they did not fully land. And Ava listened without interrupting, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady, not confrontational, not submissive, simply present, as if she was hearing not just his words but the assumptions beneath them, the habits, the expectations, the patterns that had shaped moments like this long before either of them walked into this bar. And when he finished, she did not rush to answer. She let the silence return, let it stretch just enough that it became part of the conversation rather than an absence of it. And then she moved, not toward him, not away, just a small shift of her shoulders as she reached for another napkin, folding it once in her hand with quiet precision, the soft rustle of paper somehow drawing more attention than his raised voice had moments earlier. And when she finally spoke again, her tone remained even, unchanged. Respect is not something you back up, she said, her eyes meeting his with calm clarity. It is something you choose. And the simplicity of it landed differently this time, not as a challenge, not as a defense, but as a statement that did not need to be argued to be true. And the effect was immediate though subtle, the room holding that sentence the way it had held the earlier silence, uncertain how to respond, uncertain whether it was allowed to, and Daniel felt it, felt the way the moment was slipping into something he did not control, something that did not bend to his usual rhythm. And for the first time since the drink had spilled, there was a flicker of hesitation in his stance, small enough that most would miss it, but real enough to shift the balance just a little further, like a line that had once been clear now, beginning to blur under the weight of something steadier than force. The sentence lingered longer than anything that had been said before, not because it was louder, but because it left nowhere for the moment to go. And Daniel felt that more than he expected, a subtle tightening in his chest, a hesitation that did not belong to him. And he shifted again, this time less controlled, his hand brushing the edge of the counter, as if grounding himself in something familiar, something solid, his eyes moving briefly to the others around him, searching for the easy reassurance that usually followed his words. But what he found instead was something quieter, something uncertain. A few glances quickly pulled away, a few faces turned neutral, as if no one wanted to be the first to step forward anymore. And that absence pressed in on him, small but undeniable, like a sound missing from a song he had always known. And he cleared his throat, a reflex more than a decision. His voice coming back sharper now, edged with something closer to frustration than confidence. "You talk like that like it means something," he said, the words landing harder but not cleaner, not as precise. "But this is not some classroom. This is real life." And the distinction hung there, an attempt to separate her calm from his authority, to remind the room of what mattered, of what had always mattered. But Ava did not move, did not interrupt. She simply listened, her posture unchanged, her presence steady. And that steadiness now felt heavier than before, not passive but grounded, like something that could not be pushed out of place no matter how much pressure was applied. And the bartender shifted again, finally reaching for a glass, but moving slower than usual, as if even routine actions required permission now. And the waitress at the far end picked up her tray, but did not walk away, her attention still fixed on the exchange, her expression no longer just cautious but intent, as if she was witnessing something she had not expected to see tonight. Something that did not happen in places like this. And Daniel felt all of it, the weight of their attention, the lack of easy laughter, the quiet that no longer supported him the way it had minutes ago. And he leaned in once more, closer than before, his voice dropping low, controlled but tight. "You do not get to come in here and act like you set the rules," he said, each word measured but carrying the strain of someone trying to hold on to something slipping through his hands. And Ava met his gaze without hesitation, not rising to meet him, not backing away, simply holding that space with a calm that now felt deliberate, chosen. And she did not answer right away. She let his words settle, let the room absorb them, let the silence build just enough that it became part of the tension rather than a break from it. And then she spoke, her voice steady, unchanged. "I am not setting rules," she said, the words clear, unhurried. "I am reminding you of the ones you already took an oath to follow." And the effect was immediate, not explosive, not dramatic, but deep. The kind of shift that moved through the room like a quiet current, subtle but undeniable, because it did not challenge his authority, it reframed it, it placed it in a context he could not easily dismiss. And for the first time Daniel did not respond right away, his mouth opening slightly before closing again, his eyes holding hers as if searching for something to counter, something to reduce, but finding only that same calm reflection, steady and unyielding. And the room felt different now, not just quiet but aware, as if everyone present had been pulled into a moment that demanded recognition, that refused to be ignored or brushed aside. And though no one spoke, no one moved to intervene, the balance had shifted further still, no longer just uncertain but actively changing, like a line that had been crossed without anyone noticing the exact moment it happened, and now could not be uncrossed. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy and quiet, like something that had been waiting to be said long before this moment. And Daniel stood there for a second longer than he should have, his posture still upright, but no longer effortless, the confidence that once filled the space around him now pulling inward, contained, as if it had nowhere to expand without resistance. And the room felt it, that subtle shift, that quiet recalibration, the kind that does not announce itself but changes everything anyway. The bartender finally exhaled, a slow release he did not realize he had been holding, his hand moving again to polish the same glass though his eyes remained fixed forward. And somewhere behind Ava a chair scraped lightly against the floor, the sound small but sharp in the stillness, reminding everyone that time had not stopped, only slowed to watch what came next. And Ava did not move immediately. She remained where she was, her hand resting lightly on the counter, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing even, and the stain on her sleeve had begun to dry, fading from bright red to a muted shadow, less visible now but still present, like the moment itself, something that would not disappear just because the room chose to look away. And she glanced once more at her reflection in the mirror, the soft bar lights tracing the outline of her face, her eyes steady, not hardened, not softened, just clear. And there was something in that quiet pause that felt deliberate, not hesitation but control, like she was choosing the pace of the moment rather than being carried by it. And Daniel noticed that too. The way she did not rush, the way she did not need to fill the silence. And it unsettled him in a way he could not fully understand. Because silence had always worked in his favor, had always reinforced his presence, but now it seemed to belong to her instead, shaped by her stillness rather than his authority. And he shifted his weight slightly, the movement small but visible, his hand brushing against his badge again, not as a gesture of power this time, but almost as a reminder, as if grounding himself in something familiar, something defined. And for the first time since the moment began, his gaze broke away from hers, just for a second, flicking toward the others in the room, the men who had laughed earlier, the ones who now stood quieter, their expressions more measured, less certain, and that glance revealed more than he intended, a brief acknowledgement that the room was no longer aligned the way it had been, that something had changed without permission, without force, simply through presence and refusal to bend. And when his eyes returned to Ava, there was a question there now, not spoken, not formed into words, but present, hovering beneath the surface of everything he had said, everything he had assumed. And Ava saw it, recognized it, but did not press into it, did not use it. She simply held her ground, her voice absent now, her silence doing the work her words had already set in motion, and the air between them felt different, not charged with conflict but with awareness, as if the moment had shifted from confrontation to recognition, something deeper, something that did not rely on raised voices or sharp words to carry its weight. And no one stepped in, no one interrupted, because there was nothing left to interrupt, only a quiet understanding unfolding in real time. That power did not always look the way they had been taught to recognize it, that sometimes it stood still, said less, and in doing so revealed more than anything louder ever could. And in that stillness, under the warm glow of bar lights and the faint hum of music returning at the edges, the moment held, suspended just long enough for everyone present to feel it, to see it, and to know, without needing it said aloud, that something irreversible had already begun. The silence did not break with a voice, it broke with a sound, a sharp burst of static from the police radio clipped to Daniel's shoulder, cutting clean through the low hum of returning music and half-finished conversations, and every head in the room turned, not because they wanted to, but because that sound carried authority no one questioned. All units stand by. The dispatcher's voice came through, clear and steady, filling the space between them. Be advised, Captain Ava Carter is now active on duty in your sector, and the words landed differently than anything else that had been said that night. Not emotional, not personal, just factual, but heavier than any accusation could have been. And Daniel froze, not dramatically, not visibly at first, just a pause too long, his breath catching in a way that did not belong to him, his eyes flicking instinctively toward the radio as if it might correct itself, as if he had heard it wrong. But the room had heard it too. The bartender's hand stopping mid-motion, the waitress lowering her tray slightly, the officers behind him straightening without thinking, their posture shifting from casual to alert in a reflex drilled into them over years. And then Daniel's gaze returned to Ava, slower this time, more deliberate. And for the first time he looked at her not as someone in his space, but as someone whose presence redefined it entirely, and the pieces aligned in a way he could not undo. The calm, the control, the refusal to react, the way she had spoken about oath and respect without hesitation, and his jaw tightened not in anger, but in recognition, a realization settling in that could not be pushed aside. And Ava did not move to confirm it, did not announce it. She simply stood there, the same way she had from the beginning, her posture unchanged, her expression steady, as if the truth did not need introduction, as if it had already been present in every word she had spoken. And the room shifted again, more visibly now, the officers behind Daniel adjusting their stance, shoulders back, eyes forward, uncertainty giving way to protocol, because authority had entered the room in a form they could not ignore. And Daniel's hand dropped from the edge of the counter, his fingers no longer tapping, no longer searching for control, just still. And for a moment he said nothing. The absence of words louder than anything he had said before, his earlier confidence replaced with something quieter, something heavier. And Ava finally spoke, her voice calm, unchanged. "Officer Brooks," she said, the name landing with the same precision as before, but now it carried weight the room could feel, and Daniel straightened fully, not out of pride, but out of instinct. The reflex of someone who understood exactly what that tone meant, and though no one had raised their voice, though no command had been shouted, the hierarchy in the room had been rewritten in a single breath, not through force, but through truth revealed at the exact moment it could no longer be ignored, and the bar, once filled with noise and careless laughter, now held something entirely different, a quiet, unmistakable clarity that settled over every person present, because they had all witnessed it, the shift, the moment power changed hands without a single step forward, without a single raised voice, and there was no going back from that. The room did not erupt, it settled, like dust after something heavy had shifted, and Daniel stood there with his shoulders squared but no longer commanding the space, his posture now aligned not with control, but with awareness, the kind that comes when a moment cannot be undone. And Ava held his gaze for a second longer before moving, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a small step to the side that created space rather than taking it. Her presence still steady, still calm, but now undeniably defined, and the officers behind Daniel adjusted instinctively, their hands moving to rest near their belts, their stance straightening in quiet synchronization, not out of fear but out of recognition, because the structure they operated within had just reasserted itself in a way none of them could ignore, and the bartender finally placed the glass down, the soft clink echoing gently, as if marking a transition no one would speak about later, but none would forget, and Ava's eyes moved across the room, not searching, not judging, simply observing, taking in each face, each reaction, the waitress still holding her tray, the patrons who had turned back toward their drinks but were not really drinking, and Daniel remained where he was, the silence around him no longer supportive but reflective, and when he finally spoke his voice was different, not loud, not sharp, just lower, controlled in a way that suggested something internal had shifted. "Captain," he said, the word precise, careful, landing with the weight of acknowledgement rather than resistance, and Ava nodded once, not as approval, but as recognition of the moment itself, and she did not raise her voice, did not step closer, she simply spoke. "This badge," she said, her tone even, her hand lifting slightly to indicate the insignia at his side, "is not protection from accountability," and the sentence settled deeper than anything before it, because it did not accuse, it defined, and Daniel's jaw tightened briefly before easing again, his eyes lowering for a fraction of a second before returning to meet hers, and that small movement did not go unnoticed, not by the officers behind him, not by the bartender, not by the room that had watched everything unfold, and Ava continued, not with force but with clarity. "You had a choice," she said, each word measured, "and you made it in front of everyone here." And the weight of that truth filled the space more completely than any raised voice could have, and Daniel nodded once. The motion small but deliberate, his earlier confidence replaced now with something steadier, something quieter, an understanding that could not be argued away, and Ava lowered her hand, her posture unchanged, her presence still grounded in the same calm that had defined her from the beginning. And she did not demand, did not escalate, she simply allowed the moment to hold, to be seen for what it was, and in that stillness the room shifted again, not toward tension but toward clarity, because what had happened was no longer ambiguous, no longer something that could be laughed off or ignored. It had been witnessed, defined, and understood, and the power in the room no longer came from who spoke the loudest, but from who stood the most steady, and in that quiet, unmistakable shift, the balance had fully turned, leaving behind not chaos, not confrontation, but something far more lasting, the undeniable presence of accountability settling into a place that had long gone without it. No one rushed to fill the silence after her words. Not even the music seemed eager to reclaim the space. And for a moment the entire room existed in that quiet, suspended awareness where everything had already been decided without needing to be said again. And Ava Carter lowered her hand completely, her posture still relaxed, her shoulders steady, as if the weight of the moment had never pressed on her at all. And maybe it had not. Maybe she had carried heavier things long before she ever stepped into that bar, and Daniel Brooks stood across from her, no longer leaning, no longer reaching for control, just standing, his badge catching the light in a way that felt different now, not like a symbol of authority, but like a reminder of responsibility, and he glanced down at it briefly, just a fraction of a second, before lifting his eyes again, and when he did there was no resistance left there, only recognition, the kind that settles in quietly and stays, and Ava did not press further, did not list consequences, did not raise her voice. She simply nodded. Once, a small, almost imperceptible motion that marked the end of something rather than the beginning. And then she turned, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a smooth shift of movement as she stepped away from the bar, her shoes making a soft, steady rhythm against the wooden floor, each step unhurried, controlled, the kind of movement that did not ask for attention yet drew it anyway. And the room watched her go, not out of curiosity now, but out of something closer to respect, the kind that had not been present when she first walked in, and the bartender straightened slightly, setting a clean glass in place without taking his eyes off the path she made toward the door, and the waitress exhaled softly, her grip on the tray easing as if a tension she had been holding all night had finally released, and behind Ava the officers shifted again, their posture still aligned, but quieter now, more reflective, and Daniel remained where he was, not following, not speaking, just watching, the weight of the moment settling into him in a way that could not be undone. And when the door finally opened, the cool night air slipped inside, carrying with it the distant sound of traffic and the faint glow of red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement outside. And Ava stepped through without hesitation, the light catching briefly on her shoulder, revealing the outline of her rank just before the door eased closed behind her. And the bar remained still for a second longer, as if the space itself needed time to adjust to her absence. And then slowly, quietly, life returned, glasses moved, voices resumed, but something had changed, something subtle and lasting, and Daniel reached up and unclipped his radio, holding it in his hand for a moment before securing it back in place. His movements more deliberate now, more aware, and he did not speak, did not explain, because there was nothing left to explain, only something to carry forward, and outside the streetlights reflected across the pavement in long, quiet lines, and Ava walked past them without looking back, her step steady, her presence leaving behind not noise, not conflict, but a silence that felt